The Johnson household wasn't a place you'd expect secrets to brew. Nestled in a cozy cul-de-sac, their home was always filled with laughter, clinking dishes, and the soft hum of life. 12-year-old Emma considered herself the sharpest member of the family. Her little brother, Max, was energetic and curious, but had the attention span of a goldfish. Their parents, Susan and Peter, were the dependable type, loving, involved, and predictable, until they weren't. It started small. Their mom began leaving in the evenings with hurried explanations. "I'm meeting an old friend," she'd say, grabbing her purse. Her tone was casual, but Emma noticed the nervous energy in the way her fingers tightened around the strap. Her dad didn't seem concerned, which only made it stranger. If anything, Peter seemed distracted himself, his phone constantly buzzing with calls he didn't want to take in front of anyone. "Dad, who keeps calling you?" Emma asked one night at dinner, her voice as casual as she could manage. She pushed a piece of broccoli around her plate, pretending not to care too much about the answer. Peter looked up, his expression unreadable. "Just work," he said, smiling faintly. "You know how it is." "No, I don't," Emma pressed. "You work from home. What's so urgent?" "Emma," Susan interjected, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Let your dad eat in peace." Emma's eyes narrowed. It wasn't the words, but the way her mom said them. Like she wanted to shut the conversation down. And that was the moment Emma knew something wasn't right. A week later, Emma and Max sat on the living room floor, playing a half-hearted game of Monopoly while their mom got ready to leave again. Max wasn't the best secret keeper, but Emma trusted him enough to share her suspicions. "Don't you think it's weird how much Mom leaves now?" Emma whispered, keeping an eye on the hallway. Susan's heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she moved around the house. "She said she's meeting her friend," Max said, shrugging. "Maybe they're planning a surprise for us?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "You think Mom is sneaking out to plan a surprise? For 3 weeks straight?" Max hesitated, chewing on the end of the red hotel he was holding. "Maybe she joined a book club? Mom hates book clubs. Maybe it's a yoga thing?" Emma rolled her eyes. "Max, she doesn't even own yoga pants." The sound of the front door opening silenced their debate. Susan's voice floated in from the entryway. "Don't wait up, okay?" "Sure, Mom," Emma called back, keeping her tone neutral. She heard the door shut, followed by the soft rumble of the car starting outside. Jumping to her feet, she grabbed her jacket and turned to Max. "Come on, we're following her." Max's eyes widened. "Wait, what? Like spy stuff?" "Yeah, spy stuff," Emma said, grabbing her bike helmet. "Unless you're too scared." "I'm not scared," Max said, scrambling to his feet. "But what if we get caught?" "We won't," Emma said confidently. "Now hurry up." The crisp evening air bit at their cheeks as they pedaled furiously down the street. Susan's taillights were just visible in the distance, and Emma kept a careful pace to stay out of sight. Max panted beside her, his breaths coming in short bursts. "Do you even know where we're going?" Max asked between gasps. "Nope," Emma admitted, her eyes glued to the road ahead. "But we'll figure it out." After 15 minutes of weaving through quiet streets, Susan's car pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe on the edge of town. Emma and Max ditched their bikes behind a row of bushes and crept toward the window. The warm glow from inside illuminated their mom, who sat at a corner table with a man neither of them recognized. The man was tall and lean, wearing a dark jacket that looked expensive. His face was sharp, his expression serious. He leaned forward, sliding a folder across the table to Susan. She opened it, her brow furrowing as she scanned the contents. "What do you think they're talking about?" Max whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Emma said, her stomach twisting. "But it doesn't look like yoga." Susan said something they couldn't hear, and the man responded, his gestures quick and precise. Emma's pulse quickened as she noticed the way their mom glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. "We need to get closer," Emma whispered. "Are you crazy?" Max hissed. "What if they see us?" "They won't," Emma said, already moving toward the side of the building. Max reluctantly followed, grumbling under his breath. Pressing her ear against the cold glass, Emma strained to make out the conversation. The man's voice was low but firm. "You're running out of time, Susan. If you don't handle this, they'll come after all of you, including the kids." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She pulled back, her mind racing. What did he mean? Come after all of you? And why did her mom look so terrified? Max tugged at her sleeve. We need to go. Now. Emma nodded, her instincts screaming that they'd already stayed too long. Grabbing Max's hand, she led him back to their bikes, their hearts pounding as they pedaled home in silence. Later that night, Emma sat in bed, replaying everything she'd seen and heard. Her mom's anxious demeanor, the man's ominous warning, the folder she couldn't see the contents of. It all pointed to something bigger than she could have imagined. But what? She was still lost in thought when she heard her dad's phone vibrate from the next room. Quietly slipping out of bed, she crept toward the hallway and pressed her ear against the door. Yeah, Peter said, his voice low and tense. I know, I'm handling it. There was a pause, followed by a sigh. No, we can't involve her. Not yet. It's too risky. Emma's stomach churned. Was he talking about her mom? And what did he mean by too risky? When the call ended, Emma slipped back into her room, her mind racing. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just her mom keeping secrets. Her dad was involved too. And whatever they were hiding, it was enough to make both of them act like entirely different people. Emma lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what the truth was yet, but one thing was certain. Their parents weren't who they claimed to be. Emma couldn't shake the conversation she had overheard the night before. The words, it's too risky, and they'll come after the kids, echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. Sleep had been impossible. Max, however, seemed blissfully unaware of the gravity of what they'd seen. He woke up groggy but cheerful, as if last night's adventure was nothing more than a game. Emma envied him. After breakfast, she cornered Max in his room. We're going back to the cafe tonight. Max blinked, caught off guard. What? Why? We already saw what Mom's up to. No, we didn't, Emma said, pacing back and forth. We don't know who that guy is, what they're talking about, or why Mom looks like she's about to faint every time she comes home. And Dad's acting weird too. We need to figure this out. Max hesitated, chewing his bottom lip. What if they're just planning a surprise for us? You know, like a family trip or something? Emma stopped pacing and crossed her arms. Does Dad sound like he's planning a vacation when he says, it's too risky? And why would Mom be meeting some creepy guy with a folder for that? Use your brain, Max. He winced at her tone but nodded. Fine, but this time, you're explaining everything if we get caught. That evening, Emma prepared like a professional detective. Or at least how she imagined one would. She packed snacks for Max, a small notebook for taking notes, and her mom's old binoculars from the camping gear in the garage. When Susan announced she was heading out again, Emma nodded casually. Have fun, Mom, she called, trying to mask the nervous edge in her voice. The moment the door shut, Emma grabbed Max by the arm. Let's go, Max groaned. I didn't even get to finish my game. The siblings followed the same route as before, this time staying farther behind. The air was colder tonight, the kind of chill that sank into your bones. Emma could hear Max's bike chain clinking faintly as they pedaled. Susan's car finally pulled into the cafe parking lot, and Emma felt a surge of adrenaline. Okay, same plan. We hide near the window. Why do I always have to hide? Max grumbled. Because you're shorter, Emma whispered. Now, come on. They crouched low near the same bushes as the previous night. The warm glow of the cafe lights spilled onto the sidewalk, casting long shadows. Susan was seated in the same spot, but this time the man wasn't alone. Another person, a woman with sleek black hair tied in a severe bun, sat across from her. Emma adjusted the binoculars and frowned. That's new. What's new? Max asked, squinting through the window. Who's the lady? No idea, but she looks like she could bite someone's head off, Emma muttered. The two adults leaned in closer, their expressions tense. Emma strained her ears, hoping to catch snippets of the conversation, but the glass muffled everything. She could only see Susan gesturing nervously, her hands trembling slightly. Can we leave now? Max whispered. I don't like this. Not yet, Emma said firmly. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled down a quick description of the new woman. Dark hair, sharp features, navy suit, expensive-looking bag. Suddenly, the woman glanced toward the window, and Emma ducked instinctively. She looked right at us, she hissed. Great, now she knows we're here, Max said, his voice rising in panic. No, she doesn't, Emma whispered, trying to convince herself as much as him. Just stay down. When Emma risked another peek, the man slid a black envelope across the table to Susan. Her mom hesitated before taking it, her expression a mix of dread and determination. Whatever was in that envelope, it wasn't good. On the ride home, Max was unusually quiet. Emma could tell he was scared, but she didn't have time to console him. Her mind was racing with questions. Who was the woman? What was in the envelope? And why did their mom look like she was holding a ticking time bomb? When they got home, their dad was in the living room, staring at his laptop. He barely looked up when they walked in. "Where were you two?" "Just out riding bikes," Emma said quickly. Max nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, exercise and all that." Peter raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Emma noticed the faint shadows under his eyes. He looked exhausted, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "Hey, Dad," Emma said casually, dropping her backpack on the floor. "What's been going on with Mom lately? She's been leaving a lot." Peter froze for a fraction of a second, but then his expression softened into something resembling a practiced smile. "Your mom's just helping a friend, honey. It's nothing to worry about." "Who's the friend?" Emma pressed. "Emma," Peter said, his tone warning. "Drop it." Emma bit her lip, frustrated but unwilling to push further. Instead, she went upstairs to her room, Max trailing behind her. "Dad's in on it," Emma said as she paced her bedroom. "You don't know that," Max argued, sitting cross-legged on her bed. "Maybe he's just tired." Emma snorted. "Tired of what? Pretending to be normal? Come on, Max. You saw that envelope. You saw how scared Mom looked." Max hugged his knees to his chest. "What if it's something bad? Like, what if they're in trouble?" Emma stopped pacing and sat down beside him. "Then we have to figure it out before it gets worse." "But how?" Max asked, his voice small. "We don't even know where to start." Emma thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. "The attic." Max frowned. "The attic? What does that have to do with anything? Every movie I've ever seen about secrets has something hidden in the attic." "Wait," Emma said matter-of-factly. "It's worth a shot." Max sighed. "This is a terrible idea." "Probably," Emma said, grabbing a flashlight from her nightstand. "But it's all we've got." The attic was dark and dusty, the air thick with the smell of old wood and mothballs. Emma and Max climbed carefully over boxes of holiday decorations and forgotten furniture. At the far end, Emma spotted an old trunk with a heavy padlock. "Bingo," she whispered. Max frowned. "How are we supposed to open that?" Emma grinned, pulling a bobby pin from her pocket. "I've been watching YouTube tutorials." Max groaned. "This is a terrible idea." "You said that already," Emma muttered, focusing on the lock. After a few tense minutes, the padlock clicked open. "Got it." Inside, they found what looked like random junk at first. Old photos, a stack of letters, and a newspaper clipping. But as Emma sifted through the items, her stomach dropped. The photos showed their parents, but not as they knew them. Their mom's hair was dyed a different color, and their dad wore glasses and a beard. In one picture, their mom was standing next to the man from the cafe. "What the?" Max trailed off, holding up a letter addressed to someone named Laura. "Who's Laura?" Max asked. Emma didn't answer. Her eyes were glued to the newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Fugitives still at large. Authorities suspect couple in high-profile conspiracy." She turned to Max, her face pale. "I think Mom and Dad aren't who we think they are." Emma sat on the attic floor, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The newspaper clipping felt heavy, as though the weight of its truth had seeped into her fingertips. She read the headline again, her mind refusing to accept it. "Fugitives still at large. Authorities suspect couple in high-profile conspiracy." "Emma," Max whispered urgently, his voice breaking the suffocating silence. "What does this mean? Mom and Dad, they're not criminals, right?" Emma tore her gaze from the article to look at her brother. His wide, innocent eyes reflected the same fear curling in her stomach, but she couldn't bring herself to lie. I don't know, but we can't jump to conclusions." Max picked up one of the photos. It showed their mom, her hair shorter, dyed jet black, standing next to a man who wasn't their dad. The two of them were in front of what looked like an old factory. In another photo, their dad had a beard and wore thick glasses. The name on the back read, "Paul." "Paul?" Max said, holding up the picture. "Why does Dad look like a lumberjack?" "It's a disguise," Emma said, flipping through more photos. Each one showed their parents in different outfits, with different hairstyles, and always in unfamiliar places. "These aren't just old family pictures. This is something else." Max reached for one of the letters. The paper crinkled as he unfolded it. his fingers clumsy with nerves. To Laura and Paul, he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Your location has been compromised. We'll arrange for extraction within 72 hours. Destroy all evidence and await further instructions. Laura and Paul? Emma repeated, her voice rising. Is that supposed to be Mom and Dad? Are those their real names? Max looked at her helplessly. I don't know. Maybe they're in the witness protection program or something? Emma shook her head, trying to connect the dots. If they were in witness protection, why wouldn't they tell us? And who are they hiding from? This letter doesn't sound like something a cop would write. Her heart pounded as she picked up another letter. This one was addressed to Paul and Laura Johnson. The neat script read, Final warning, comply or there will be consequences. You know what's at stake. Emma, Max whispered, clutching her arm. I don't like this. What if someone's after them? What if we're in danger? We're not, Emma said quickly, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. She shoved the letters, photos, and the newspaper clipping back into the box. We need to get out of here before they come home. The siblings crept back downstairs, their ears straining for any sign of their parents. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway. Emma carefully closed the attic door, her heart racing. Emma, Max said, his voice trembling, what do we do now? Emma hesitated. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him everything would be fine, but the truth was she didn't know. We need more information. We can't just go to them and ask, hey, are you fugitives? We need proof. Max frowned. What kind of proof? Something recent, Emma said, thinking aloud. They're still meeting that guy from the cafe, and Dad keeps getting those phone calls. Maybe they're connected. Max shook his head vigorously. I don't want to spy on them again. What if we get caught? We won't, Emma said firmly, though her voice wavered. We just have to be careful. That evening, Emma lingered in the kitchen while her parents made dinner. She tried to act normal, but every word they said seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Emma, can you set the table? Susan asked, her tone light and cheerful. Sure, Mom, Emma said, glancing at her mother's face. She looked tired, as though she hadn't slept in days. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. How was school today? Peter asked, slicing vegetables with practiced ease. Fine, Emma replied, trying to sound casual. How was work? Peter paused for a fraction of a second before answering. Busy as always. Who keeps calling you? Emma blurted before she could stop herself. Susan and Peter exchanged a quick glance. It was subtle, but Emma caught it. Her mom spoke first. Just some colleagues from your dad's old job. Nothing to worry about. Why are they calling so late? Emma pressed, her tone sharper than she intended. Emma, Peter said, his voice calm but firm. Enough. Emma bit her lip, her cheeks flushing. She knew she'd pushed too hard. Sorry, she muttered, grabbing the plates and retreating to the dining room. After dinner, their parents went to the living room, leaving Emma and Max alone to clean up. Max glanced nervously at her as they loaded the dishwasher. What was that about? I had to try, Emma whispered. But they're not going to tell us anything. We need to figure it out ourselves. Max hesitated, then nodded. Okay, what's the plan? Emma smiled faintly. We wait. Later that night, Emma heard the familiar buzz of Peter's phone. She slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway, her socks muffling her footsteps. She crouched outside her parents' bedroom door, straining to hear. Yeah, I got the message, Peter said, his voice low. No, I haven't told her. She doesn't need to know. There was a pause, and Emma's stomach churned. I said I'd handle it, Peter continued, his tone sharper now. We just need more time. Emma's mind raced. Who doesn't need to know? What does he need time for? The conversation ended abruptly, and Emma barely made it back to her room before Peter stepped into the hallway. She held her breath, her heart pounding as his shadow passed under her door. The next morning, Emma and Max sat at the kitchen table, their parents bustling around them. Peter's phone buzzed again, and he quickly silenced it, his expression tight. I have to head out for a bit, Peter said, grabbing his jacket. Susan glanced at him, frowning. Now? I thought you weren't meeting him until tomorrow. Peter froze, his hand on the doorknob. Change of plans? He said shortly, and then he was gone. Emma's heart skipped a beat. This was her chance. She shot a look at Max, who seemed to understand immediately. Where are you going, Emma? Susan called as the siblings headed for the door. Just outside, Emma said over her shoulder, already pulling Max along. We'll be back soon. Emma and Max followed Peter at a safe distance, their bikes keeping to the shadows. He drove into town and parked near an old warehouse. Emma's stomach twisted as she watched him get out of the car and approach the man from the cafe. The man handed Peter a thick envelope. Peter opened it, his face tense as he scanned the contents. Emma wished she had her binoculars. What's he doing? Max whispered, his voice trembling. I don't know, Emma said, her heart pounding. But whatever it is, it's big. Suddenly, Peter turned sharply, his gaze sweeping the area. Emma and Max ducked behind a dumpster, holding their breath. When they peeked out again, Peter was gone. Let's go home, Max whispered urgently. Before they find us. Emma nodded reluctantly, but her mind was already racing. The envelope, the letter, the pictures in the attic, it all pointed to one thing. Their parents were hiding something far bigger than a simple misunderstanding. And whatever it was dangerous. The air was thick with tension as Emma and Max returned home, their legs heavy from pedaling and their minds racing with unanswered questions. Peter's mysterious meeting and the envelope he received had only deepened the mystery, leaving them more unsettled than ever. Emma's determination to uncover the truth burned brighter, but Max was growing increasingly scared. What if they already know we're onto them? Max whispered as they quietly slipped through the back door. What if they're dangerous? Emma shot him a look, her brows furrowed. They're our parents, Max. They're not dangerous. How do you know? Max shot back, his voice trembling. You saw the pictures. You heard what Dad said on the phone. They're lying to us about everything. Emma paused, his words stinging in a way she hadn't expected. She wanted to believe their parents were the same loving, dependable people they'd always been. But with every new revelation, that belief cracked a little more. We don't know the whole story yet, she said firmly, though doubt crept into her voice. We need answers, and the only way to get them is to keep watching. Max crossed his arms, his face pale. I don't want to watch anymore. You don't have to, Emma said, softening her tone. But I'm not giving up. The next day passed in a blur. Susan acted like nothing was amiss, humming to herself as she folded laundry. Peter spent most of the afternoon in his study, the door locked. Emma's stomach churned every time she caught their eyes, guilt gnawing at her for keeping secrets of her own. But she pushed it aside. Whatever they were hiding was bigger than a few lies. That evening, Emma heard her mom on the phone. She wasn't trying to be discreet this time. Her voice carried down the hallway, sharp and urgent. No, I can't meet tonight, Susan said, pacing the kitchen. It's too soon. We need more time too. She stopped abruptly, her gaze darting toward the living room, as though she sensed she was being overheard. I'll call you back. Emma barely had time to duck behind the corner before Susan turned and walked past her. Her mother's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Emma's heart pounded as she made a split-second decision. She grabbed Max's arm as he sat in the living room, engrossed in a video game. She's leaving again, Emma hissed. We're following her. Max's eyes widened. What? No way, I'm not doing this again. Fine, Emma snapped. Stay here. I'll do it myself. Max hesitated, his hands tightening around the controller. You can't go alone. Then come with me, Emma said, her tone pleading. Please, Max, I need you. They followed Susan's car on their bikes, staying far enough back to avoid detection. The night was colder than the last, and Emma's hands felt numb against the handlebars. Susan drove to the outskirts of town, pulling into the parking lot of an abandoned office building. The sight sent a chill down Emma's spine. Why here? Max whispered as they hid behind a row of bushes. This place is creepy. Emma didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on her mom, who got out of the car and disappeared through a side entrance. A few minutes later, another car pulled up. The man from the cafe stepped out, followed by the sleek-haired woman they'd seen with him. The two exchanged a brief glance before entering the building. Who are they? Max asked, his voice trembling. I don't know, Emma admitted, but they're involved in whatever this is. The siblings waited for what felt like hours, their nerves fraying with every passing second. Just as Emma began to wonder if they should leave, the side door burst open. Susan came out first, clutching a manila envelope to her chest. The man and woman followed close behind, their expressions tense. You have until tomorrow, the man said, his voice cold and final. If you don't deliver, there will be consequences. Susan didn't respond. She climbed into her car, her movements stiff and robotic, and drove away. The man and woman lingered for a moment before getting into their own car and speeding off in the opposite direction. Emma's mind raced as she and Max crept back to their bikes. The words, "there will be consequences," echoed in her ears, sending a shiver down her spine. Back home, Susan acted as though nothing had happened. She sat on the couch with Peter, the two of them speaking in low voices. Emma and Max watched from the staircase, their parents' hushed tones only adding to the weight of their unease. "We need to talk to them," Max whispered, his voice barely audible. "We need to tell them what we saw." "No," Emma said quickly. "Not yet. We don't know enough." "Then when?" Max asked, frustration creeping into his tone. "What if something bad happens? What if it's too late?" Emma didn't have an answer. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of raised voices. She slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway, peeking into the kitchen where her parents stood facing each other, their expressions strained. "We're running out of time, Peter," Susan said, her voice sharp. "They're not going to wait forever." "I know that," Peter snapped. "But we can't rush this. One mistake, and it's over." Susan's hands trembled as she leaned against the counter. "We should have told the kids." "No," Peter said firmly. "The less they know, the safer they are." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She backed away, her mind spinning. Whatever their parents were involved in, it wasn't just dangerous. It was something that could put her and Max in harm's way. That night, Emma decided she couldn't wait any longer. While their parents were distracted, she and Max slipped into Peter's study. The room was neat and orderly, the air tinged with the faint scent of coffee and leather. Emma headed straight for the desk, rifling through papers and opening drawers. "What are we even looking for?" Max asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "Anything," Emma said. "Something that explains what's going on." Her fingers brushed against a stack of documents in one drawer. She pulled them out and froze. They were passports. 4 of them. Each had a different name and photo, but the faces were unmistakably their parents. "Laura and Paul Johnson," Emma read aloud. "Who the heck are Laura and Paul?" Max picked up one of the passports, his hands shaking. Why did they need fake names? Before Emma could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Her stomach dropped. "Hide!" She hissed, shoving the papers back into the drawer. They barely had time to duck behind the couch before the door opened. Peter stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room. Emma held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. After a long moment, Peter sighed and closed the door. The siblings waited until his footsteps faded before slipping out of the study and back to their rooms. Later that night, as Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she felt the full weight of their situation settle over her. Their parents were hiding something huge, something dangerous, and they were running out of time to figure out what it was. "We need help," Max said softly from his bed. "We can't do this alone." Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure who they could trust. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "We'll figure it out tomorrow." But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. And whatever was coming next, it wouldn't just change their family. It would change everything. The night after their narrow escape from Peter's study was suffocatingly quiet. Emma lay awake, replaying the events over and over in her head. The passports, the argument, the threatening words from the man at the abandoned office. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Their parents were in serious trouble. When morning finally came, the sun brought little comfort. Over breakfast, Peter and Susan sat across from each other at the table, their faces drawn and pale. Max poked at his cereal, clearly uneasy. Emma decided to break the silence. "So," she began, keeping her voice light, "what's the plan for today? Anything exciting?" Peter glanced up, his smile strained. "Just the usual. Work for me. Your mom's helping her friend." "Which friend is that again?" Emma pressed, leaning forward. Peter's expression darkened slightly. "Emma, I don't think it's polite to keep questioning your mom." Susan shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting toward the window. "I'll be running errands most of the day," she said quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Don't wait up for me, okay?" Emma exchanged a look with Max, who looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. Later that afternoon, Peter left for his work, and Susan was nowhere to be found. Emma seized the opportunity to comb through the study again, this time with Max reluctantly in tow. "We're going to get caught," Max whispered as Emma rummaged through the desk drawers. "Not if you help me," Emma shot back, her frustration bubbling over. "Look for anything about that man or the woman he was with." Max sighed but started flipping through a stack of papers on the bookshelf. He froze when he came across a folder labeled Project Atlas. "Emma," he whispered, holding it up. "What's this?" Emma snatched the folder from his hands and opened it. Inside were pages filled with technical schematics, maps, and a list of names, including their parents' fake ones, Laura and Paul Johnson. At the bottom of one page was a single, ominous sentence: "Target acquisition imminent. Secure the asset at all costs." "What does asset mean?" Max asked, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Emma admitted, her hands shaking. "But I think it's Mom and Dad." Before they could delve deeper, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway sent a jolt of panic through them. Emma shoved the folder back onto the shelf and grabbed Max's arm. They slipped out of the study just as Peter's footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Why is he back so early?" Max whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Emma said, dragging him upstairs. "But we need to be careful." That evening, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, convinced she saw shadows moving outside the windows. Max was jittery too, jumping at every creak of the house. "Do you think those people?" he started, but Emma cut him off. "Don't," she said sharply. "We don't know who they are, but we can't let them scare us." When the doorbell rang, both of them froze. Emma's heart raced as Peter called out from the living room, "I'll get it." She crept to the top of the stairs, peeking through the railing as Peter opened the door. A tall man in a gray trench coat stood on the porch, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. "Can I help you?" Peter asked, his tone cautious. The man smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson. Or should I say Paul?" Emma's blood ran cold. She could see Peter stiffen, his grip tightening on the door. "I'm sorry," Peter said, his voice carefully controlled. "You must have the wrong house." The man's smile widened. "Oh, I think I've got the right one, but I'm not here to chat. Just a friendly reminder. You're out of time." Before Peter could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Peter shut the door, his hands shaking. He stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. Emma waited until her parents went to bed before sneaking downstairs. Max followed reluctantly, his face pale. "What are we doing?" he hissed as Emma grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the backyard. "Looking for clues," Emma said, pushing open the back door. "That guy didn't just come here for fun. He's watching us. I'm sure of it." The backyard was eerily quiet, the faint chirping of crickets the only sound. Emma scanned the area with her flashlight, her pulse quickening when the beam landed on a cigarette butt near the fence. "Someone's been here," she whispered, picking it up. "He's been watching us." Max tugged at her sleeve. "Let's go inside. This is freaking me out." Emma nodded reluctantly, but as they turned to leave, a rustling noise came from the bushes. She spun around, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Who's there?" The bushes parted, and a figure stepped out, a man, dressed in all black, with a hood pulled low over his face. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Run!" she screamed, grabbing Max's hand and sprinting toward the house. They burst through the door, slamming it shut behind them. Peter and Susan appeared in the hallway, their faces etched with concern. "What's going on?" Peter demanded, his eyes darting to the locked door. "There's someone outside," Emma shouted, her chest heaving. "He was in the backyard, watching us." Peter exchanged a look with Susan, who immediately grabbed her phone. "Call the police," she said, her voice trembling. "No," Peter said sharply, grabbing her arm. "We can't." "Why not?" Susan asked, her voice rising. "Paul, they know where we are. We can't keep pretending everything's fine." Emma's head spun. "Paul?" she repeated, her voice breaking. "Who's Paul?" Peter turned to her, his face pale. For a long moment, he said nothing, the weight of his silence crushing the room. Finally, he sighed. "It's time you knew the truth." In the living room, Peter and Susan sat across from Emma and Max, their faces etched with guilt. Susan spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not who you think we are," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "Our real names are Laura and Paul Miller. Before you were born, we worked for an organization that, let's just say, wasn't exactly legal. You're criminals? Max asked, his voice trembling. No, Peter said quickly. Not anymore. We got out years ago, but some people, they don't forget. Susan nodded. The man you saw tonight and the people at the cafe, they're trying to force us back in. They want us to finish something we started a long time ago. Emma felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Why didn't you tell us? We wanted to protect you, Peter said, his voice cracking. The less you knew, the safer you were. But now they know where we are, Susan said, her hands shaking. We have to leave. Tonight. Emma and Max exchanged a horrified look. Leave? Emma repeated. We can't just leave. What about our lives here? Peter's face hardened. We don't have a choice. If we stay, we're putting all of us in danger. As the family packed their belongings, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She kept glancing out the window, half expecting the man in the trench coat to appear again. The weight of their parents' secret was crushing. But one question lingered in her mind. If they're running from their past, what's to stop it from finding them again? As the car pulled out of the driveway, Emma looked back at the house one last time, her heart heavy with uncertainty. This wasn't just the end of their old lives. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. And deep down, she knew they weren't safe yet. The headlights of the family's SUV sliced through the darkened highway as they sped away from the only home Emma and Max had ever known. The weight of their parents' confession hung in the air, suffocating and unyielding. Susan sat in the passenger seat, wringing her hands nervously, while Peter gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Emma and Max sat in the back, the silence between them heavy with unanswered questions. Finally, Max broke the quiet, his voice small and uncertain. Where are we going? Peter didn't take his eyes off the road. Somewhere safe. That's not an answer, Emma said, her voice sharper than she intended. We deserve to know what's going on. Peter exhaled, his jaw tightening. We're going to a safe house. It's part of the protocol for situations like this. Protocol? Emma repeated, her anger bubbling to the surface. You mean running for our lives because of something you did? Emma, Susan said gently, turning in her seat. We know this is hard to understand, but we did what we thought was best to protect you. To protect us? Emma snapped. By lying to us our entire lives? By dragging us into this mess? Susan's face crumpled, but she didn't respond. Peter's voice was calm but firm when he spoke. Enough, Emma. This isn't the time for this conversation. When is the time? Emma shot back, her eyes burning with tears. You've had years to tell us the truth, and you waited until we're being chased by criminals to finally say something? Emma, Susan said softly, her voice trembling. We're sorry, but right now we need to focus on staying safe. Hours later, they arrived at a remote cabin deep in the woods. The house was small and unassuming, its weathered exterior blending into the dark forest around it. Peter parked the car and killed the engine, stepping out to scan the area. It's clear, he said, motioning for the others to follow. Let's get inside. Emma and Max exchanged a wary glance before climbing out of the car. The cold night air bit at their skin as they hurried toward the cabin. Inside, the air was musty, the furniture old and sparse. A single lantern on the table cast flickering shadows across the walls. This is cozy, Max said, trying to lighten the mood. It's temporary, Peter said, locking the door and checking the windows. We won't be here long. Susan sat down at the table, burying her face in her hands. We never should have stayed in one place so long. I knew it was a mistake. We didn't have a choice, Peter said, his tone clipped. The kids needed stability. Well, that worked out great, Emma muttered, dropping onto the couch. Peter ignored her. We'll regroup here and figure out our next move. I'll contact our handler in the morning. Handler? Max asked, his brow furrowing. What does that mean? Peter hesitated. Someone who helps people like us. Criminals, you mean, Emma said bitterly. We're not criminals, Peter snapped, his patience fraying. We did what we had to do to survive. Survive what? Emma shot back. You keep saying you were protecting us, but from what? Who are these people and why are they after you? Peter and Susan exchanged a glance, their silence speaking volumes. Finally, Susan spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We worked for an organization called Blackwell. They weren't what they claimed to be. Blackwell? Max repeated. What's that? A private company, Peter explained, his voice heavy with regret. On the surface, they were legitimate, consulting, technology, intelligence services. But beneath that, they were involved in things we didn't agree with. Illegal things. Emma crossed her arms. Like what? Peter hesitated, his expression darkening. Weapons trafficking, espionage, eliminating people who got in their way. Max's eyes widened. You mean like killing people? Peter didn't answer, but the look on his face said enough. We found out too much, Susan continued, her voice trembling. When we tried to leave, they came after us. We had to disappear. Change everything. Our names, our identities, our lives. And now they've found us, Emma said, her voice flat. Because you couldn't leave it alone. Peter's expression hardened. It's not that simple. We didn't choose this. Didn't you? Emma shot back. Stop it, Susan cried, tears streaming down her face. We did this for you, to keep you safe. Everything we've done was for you. Emma opened her mouth to argue, but the pain in her mother's eyes stopped her. She sank back into the couch, her anger fading into exhaustion. The next morning, Peter woke Emma and Max early. Pack your things, he said. We're moving again. Already? Emma asked, rubbing her eyes. We just got here. It's not safe to stay in one place for too long, Peter said. We have to keep moving. As they gathered their belongings, the sound of tires crunching on gravel froze them in place. Peter grabbed a gun from his bag, his face grim. Stay here, he said, his voice low. Don't move. Emma and Max huddled together, their hearts pounding as Peter stepped outside. Through the window, Emma saw a black SUV parked in the driveway. Two men got out, their faces cold and menacing. You're a hard man to find, Paul, one of them said, his voice dripping with malice. Peter raised the gun, his hand steady. You shouldn't have come here. The man smirked. Oh, I think we should have. You owe Blackwell a lot, and they don't take kindly to debts. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed Max's arm, pulling him toward the back door. We have to get out of here, she whispered. What about Mom and Dad? Max asked, his voice shaking. We'll come back for them, Emma said, her voice breaking. But we can't stay here. As they slipped out the back door, the sound of shouting erupted from the front of the house. Emma led Max through the woods, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind them, gunshots rang out, sending birds scattering into the sky. Keep going, Emma urged, her legs burning as they ran. After what felt like hours, they stumbled onto a dirt road. Emma collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Max sat beside her, tears streaming down his face. Do you think they're okay? He asked, his voice trembling. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. They're tough. They'll be fine. Suddenly, the sound of an engine roared to life behind them. Emma turned, her heart sinking as the black SUV barreled down the road toward them. Run, she screamed, grabbing Max's hand. Just when it seemed like the SUV would catch them, another car appeared. A beat-up pickup truck that swerved between the siblings and their pursuers. The driver, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, motioned for them to get in. Get in if you want to live, she shouted. Emma didn't hesitate. She shoved Max into the truck and climbed in after him. The woman hit the gas, sending the truck speeding down the road. Who are you? Emma asked, her voice shaking. A friend, the woman said, her eyes fixed on the road. Your parents sent me. The woman introduced herself as Harper, a former operative who had left Blackwell years ago. Your parents knew this day might come, she said. They had me on standby in case things went south. Are they okay? Max asked, his voice small. Harper's expression softened. They'll be fine. Your dad's tougher than he looks. Emma wasn't convinced, but she didn't have the strength to argue. As they drove toward an uncertain future, she couldn't help but wonder if their lives would ever be normal again. One thing was certain, their parents' secrets had changed everything, and there was no going back.